Hey, I'm Fight the Flat Earth. Welcome back to the channel that does to stupidity what the Joker did to Jason Todd. And welcome to Sleeping Warrior Week, a whole week dedicated to the brilliant mind of a great man who we all respect. No, I couldn't keep a straight face. It's a whole week about how fucking stupid and dishonest Anthony Riley is. Yes, that's right, everybody's favourite failed lawyer who for some reason thinks that he can debunk the entire scientific community gets a whole week, as frankly there's far too much stupid to fit into one video or even just one day. This week will feature Anthony Riley's second episode of Flerfs are Idiots, the top 10 dumbest things ever said by Sleeping Warrior, a promo for Riley to be Dumb Fuck of the Year 2019, as, you know, after 2 years of running up, he needs to win. A round 2 of debating between me and him, the roast of Anthony Riley, Bob the Science Guy's breakdown of my first debate with him, as well as content from other channels like Planet Walk, Creaky Blinder, Conspiracy Cats, Casual Spaceman, and more. But first, I'm going to shut Sleeping Warrior up about one of his misconceptions. The moron started using an article called How Einstein Revealed the Universe's Strange Non-Locality, written by George Musser on Scientific America, to somehow prove that gravity isn't real. He had one particular phrase that he stuck to. Einstein snapped the wand of Newton. He thinks this means that we should disregard everything Newton ever said as, in his words, it's antiquated science. I argued he was very, very wrong about this, as the scientific consensus is that Einstein built on Newton's work. Newton was the what and Einstein was the why. He called me an idiot and a moron and a liar. My dad always told me, don't screw around, just go to the source. So I did that. And here is my interview with contributing editor for Scientific America, George Musser. Suck it, Riley.
We're living on a disk, floating through space, with a tiny sun.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Fight the Flat Earth. Now today is a very specific video. I've been having a back and forth, as I'm sure most of you are aware, with Sleeping Warrior. One of the specifics he's been talking about is an article written by the gentleman that I am speaking with today, Mr. George Musser, who is a contributing editor for Scientific America. George, would you just like to take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
So as you said, I'm a contributing editor for Scientific American magazine. I was a senior editor there for a number of years, actually for almost 15 years, on the topics of fundamental physics and space science. My background's actually in planetary science, although I really can't claim to be a planetary scientist anymore. That's so deep in my history, but my thesis work was on the planet Venus. And since then, I've really been branching out in my scientific interests to other domains of physical science, and specifically fundamental physics, our understanding of gravity, of the attempts to build a quantum theory of gravity, and quantum mechanical principles, understanding what quantum physics is telling us about the nature of reality.
Excellent. Obviously, you've had a passion for science most of your life, I assume.
Oh yeah, of course.
Excellent.
Yeah, it goes back to when I was a small kid.
Yeah. What did you think when I first contacted you and said about the fact that there's a bunch of people that think the Earth is flat?
Well, I mean, I had, of course, known about the people who think that the Earth is flat. It's well known in the media, and I've talked to people, colleagues about it. I'm a little perplexed by it. I should say though, I'm happy in a broader sense that people care, that this is a topic that people are willing to debate, even if they get some things wrong. I mean, we're all get things wrong in life, and that's not the issue. But to actually have a passion for understanding what is the nature of the universe, I admire. So I think there's a lot that's admirable in even though people I disagree with on the technical details.
Okay, perfect. I'm not really going to talk any more about flat Earth in general. Sure. So we'll just get into it really. So Sleeping Warrior has been citing an article that you wrote. Right. I lose the name of the article for a second. How Einstein Revealed the Universe's Strange Non-Locality. That's the one. So the main issue that Sleeping Warrior has with this was the phrase you used of Einstein snapping the wand. Now, right. Sleeping Warrior has the impression that this means that Einstein snapped the wand and therefore disregarded everything that Newton ever did. Meaning his law of gravitational acceleration is invalid and, as he calls it, antiquated science and shouldn't ever be referred to. Could I just get your clarification on what you mean by snapping the wand?
Right. So just to take a step back, the kind of overall message of that article was to look at kind of a progression of scientific ideas. So Newton developed his law of gravity really based on Kepler's laws and brought his observations of Mars and the planets in our own solar system and their orbits and positions. Newton developed this law of gravity that we're all taught. But even Newton and his contemporaries had a real problem with that law, namely that it described gravity's effects, but it really described how gravity works. And Newton actually in his own life tried to develop, unsuccessfully as it turns out, an understanding of how gravity works. What is actually communicating the influence, for instance, between the Earth and the Moon or between the Sun and Mars, etc. And he really fell to Einstein. Einstein's role here was to really fill in that mechanism. He explained how is it that massive objects, exert what seems to be a force on one another. Now, literally, it's not a force. So the thing about Newton's laws, you can't take it literally, but Newton himself didn't. Newton had various ideas on this, but generally it's thought that Newton did not take his own law that literally, that there is a force reaching from one object out to another. However, you can act as if there were one, and it's perfectly valid for the applications of Newton's laws to act as though this force is operating.
So you can still use Newton's laws to calculate gravity as a force?
Absolutely, and it works to a high degree of approximation. There are circumstances under which it begins to reveal that it's merely an approximation, but it's a high accuracy approximation that is used routinely by NASA to do its missions, by just all of us whenever we act, when we understand the formations of planets and so forth. So, the snapping of the wand that I was referring to was the specific idea that the force is non-local. In other words, that Earth reaches out as though by magic, to hold on to the moon, and grip it.
So obviously Newton thought that gravity acted instantaneously.
Instantaneously, but even more than instantaneously, is that it didn't propagate through the intervening distance between the objects. So there's really no way that the force got from one place to the other in a sense of how it exerted its action. That was the magical component of Newton's laws, recognized by him and Leibniz and the others in his time. So, I used the word magic in a couple of senses here. First of all, it's magic in the sense of, supernatural, but it's also magic in the sense it actually did come from a very particular scientific tradition that was, by modern standards, magical. It thought of the universe as infused by connections between different places that weren't mediated by some kind of atomistic mechanism. Right. So Einstein came along and he said, and again, he's following in Newton's own footsteps. Einstein came along and said, what could cause this force, or this apparent force, or this action that gravity exerts? And he developed this whole theory of space-time and its distortions, and how masses distort space-time, which in turn exerts what we perceive as the effects of gravity. So that's the breaking of the magic wand, is in the sense of filling in a mechanism that had not been there.
Right. He specifically says about the fact, because you say it snapped the one in two by showing that the curvature of space-time and not an invisible force gives rise to gravitational attraction. Now, am I right in assuming that when you say not an invisible force, that doesn't mean that you still can't calculate it as a force? Obviously, as my understanding is, like you said, Newton just thought it was something that propagated everywhere instantaneously throughout space and was almost an inherent property of matter, whereas Einstein gave a reason. And the way that I describe it, and I would like to see if you agree with this, is that gravity is the warping of space-time by mass, which changes the locality of things, which manifests within physics that we can measure as an accelerating force.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. And I like the word manifestation. I mean, science, as you know, operates on multiple levels of explanation. And often we speak in an approximate way to kind of make progress and understand phenomena that we observe, even though we kind of know deep down it doesn't quite work that way. So we know, for instance, that this desk that I'm on seems to be solid, but if you were to carefully examine it, actually there'd be mostly empty space there, and the solidity is produced by the electrical magnetic forces between the atoms and the hand, the atoms in the desk and the atoms in my hand, for example, in this case. So we can still call things solid. I mean, scientists routinely do that. And then at a deeper level, they know it's not really solid, and then they question what solidity even is. And it's a similar thing with Newtonian gravity. We can and do, and we must think of Newtonian gravity as a force. That doesn't mean it really is, but we don't necessarily need to work at the really is level in this case. We can still think of it as a force for understanding projectile motion, when you throw a baseball, or calculate the orbit of the moon or a satellite. It works extremely well. And it's only really the fundamental physicist who's trying to understand the causes of things that really begins to question that picture.
Yeah. I mean, we still don't fully know the complete cause of gravity.
No.
I mean, we understand that it's mass warping space-time, but from my understanding, we don't know the exact mechanism as to why that happens. And I know when you move into higher end physics, it's much more about energy, rather the mass and everything. And there is a lot of investigation as to exact the mechanism as behind why it does what it does. But science has a current understanding that works. And what I try to explain to the flat earthers that I talk to is that we never disregard what's come before. We always build upon that. And Einstein built upon what Newton understood of gravity.
Right, exactly. He did. Again, the only fault is we can't take the Newtonian picture too literally. In other words, we can't say well, I mean, it depends again what the question you're trying to answer is. If you're trying to answer why does the moon orbit the Earth at a certain velocity and so forth, the position, yes, it's perfectly valid to speak in terms of force. It's only really, again, when you're answering or trying to answer different questions about why does gravity work? Why do things attract each other? Then you need to start questioning your force terminology and your force concepts.
Yep.
And so it's, again, you're kind of thinking two different levels here, and that is routine in science. I mean, the biologist doesn't worry about the particles, the chemist doesn't worry about the subatomic particles so much, et cetera. The sociologist doesn't really worry about the physics at all. I mean, we all have to operate on these different levels. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been trying to get across for so long to many people. Now, there is a couple other things that Stephen Moore had issues with. You wrote another article called What is Space-Time? Mm-hmm. And in it you say a year earlier, talking about Einstein, a year earlier he had formulated his general theory of relativity, which postulates that gravity is not a force that propagates through space, but a feature of space-time itself. Again, I see that as the same misunderstanding as the snapping of the one thing. It's the fact that you've said postulates that gravity is not a force, and I think that confuses him. So could you just clarify that particular phrase for me?
So gravity is not a force. When one is trying to understand why gravity operates in the universe, why there is a tendency of objects to attract one another, to orbit around one another, which is a type of, really comes from the attraction, why bodies pull themselves together into spherical shapes, for example, or discs type shapes in other systems. So why does that all happen? Then the idea of gravity as a force in the Newtonian sense of a kind of almost undefined entity that grabs things across space, that force concept becomes a problem when you're trying to understand why gravity works. The fact that gravity does work, it's obvious from everything around us. And when maybe I should put it this way: when describing the workings of gravity, you shouldn't use force concepts. When you describe the effects of gravity, yes, use force concepts. You're perfectly entitled to speak of gravity as a force when you're working through its implications, when you're working through why things fall, why things move in the way they do.
Okay.
It's only when you start to get into the deep questions, and those are the ones, of course, I was dealing with in that particular article. In other articles, I'm perfectly happy to describe, and I do describe gravity as a force, as I do describe electrical forces or strong force or things like this, even though depending on context, I might not use the force terminology.
That actually answers it very well. It's again, it's the fact that you use the phrase which postulates that gravity is not a force that propagates through space-time. He focuses on the words there, that gravity is not a force, and kind of ignores the rest of the context. So
yeah, that's fair. Gravity is not a force, but you can think of it as a force. Maybe that's the best way of putting it.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've tried to explain to him, is that you can measure it as a force. You can do calculations to say it is a force, and for all intents and purposes, on our planet, with us and in everyday physics, it is a force that you can measure.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Perfect. Now, the third thing he wanted me to address was a video that had, from Caltech. Did you get a chance to look at that briefly?
Yeah, I saw there was kind of a press release from Caltech. It basically reiterated what I had in my article.
Yeah, it's very much the same arguments. All the 5 points that he's asked me to give you, they're all very much the same thing as all these people saying not a force but a warping of space-time, and that particular usage of the phrase "not a force" is what really confuses him. And I'm very happy that I've had you clarify that obviously we can measure it as a force.
Right, and there's any number of textbooks. One doesn't have to go to the Caltech press release. One can go to the actual Caltech professors and see the textbooks they've written on the topic, in which they kind of, again, make the same distinction that I'm making here between the effects that can be described in force terms and the mechanism that you can't really use force terminology with.
Yeah. Now, I'm just going to get the other bit up. If I don't specifically address the points that he said, he's going to get very angry and say that I didn't ask you the correct questions. I just want to make sure this is done properly. So, right, yeah, it's because it talks about Einstein described the space and time as one thing, and he has issues with, again, the phrase of it warping, being not a force and warping space-times. It's the same argument, actually, that I think you have addressed. And I think it's just because he wanted you specifically to address the fact that all these people say it's not it's not a force but the warping of space-time. But I'm pretty sure we've covered all of that, to be honest.
I mean, I think he a lot of what he said, and if I was listening correctly, was right in a way. He was right to state that gravity is not literally a force; it's the warping of space-time, and there's a space-time continuum that mass affects, and so forth and so on. It was really just the next step in the reasoning that kind of didn't hold, which is that because gravity is not literally a force, we can't trust Newtonian force law. That's not the case. In fact, you can derive the Newtonian force law from the Einstein field equations of general relativity. It's quite holds to a high degree of accuracy. So there are some additional mathematical terms that one has to take into account, for instance, with black holes and with strong gravity situations, or with high velocities near the speed of light. So there's no real opposition to these ideas. I think it's one of these cases of getting some things right and maybe a couple things wrong.
Yeah, he can't seem to understand that. Right. Well, he basically says that Newtonian gravity and Einsteinian gravity are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I think that's certainly wrong, and I can understand why. I mean, maybe I'm and the other scientists are at fault on this for putting in these stark terms by saying it's not a force, whatever. We didn't really clarify that, so I can understand how the misconception can arise. But they're certainly not in opposition.
No.
Einstein would never have said that.
Yeah. Even Einstein himself, in an article he wrote called Time, Space and Gravitation, he says that Newtonian principles can never be disregarded as they're the base of most modern day physics.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the context of that remark is, but it sounds plausible to me.
Yeah. So within,
I have a number of Einstein's works here. I can look it up later if you want.
It was in an article called Time, Space and Gravitation that he wrote, I think, November 28th, 1919 for the London Times.
Okay.
And he's talking to some physicists in another country, and he's very happy that they're communicating because they weren't during the war. And in that he talks about his understanding of gravity, and the base principles are very different from Newtonian gravity. But then in the next paragraph, he clarifies by saying that you can never disregard what Newton did because it helped him come up with his theory of relativity.
Absolutely.
So, obviously, the main point of this conversation was to get your clarification on the article of you wrote how Einstein revealed the universe is strange non-locality, and I think you've most definitely clarified what you meant by that. I just wanted to talk to you about the project Aristophanes that we are working on.
Good.
If people watching this don't know, George Musser and I are working together on something called Project Aristophanes. I know a lot of people have already agreed to be part of this. We're going to be measuring the circumference of the planet on May the 25th by, was it 5 different positions across the American continent now?
Yeah, I mean, the more the merrier.
Yeah, the more the merrier. So we are looking for people around Montreal, New York, California, Lima, and there was somewhere in Mexico that you said as well.
Yeah, I mean, ideally we need people along latitude lines or bands at least.
Yeah.
So that's why the Montreal, New York, and then South America connection is so important.
Yeah.
But if there are people, for instance, in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, or Baja California, there is a good latitude line for you. There's obviously anywhere in the world that people can be stacked up along the north-south line, do it. We do need, however, that longitude or approximate longitude, because the experiment is done at a moment along the longitude line as it was originally done in the ancient world.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So if anybody wants to get involved with that, if you're in any of the locations, pretty much anywhere around America at this point, just please email me at fighttheflatearth@gmail.com. With the header Project Aristophanes. If you'd like to get involved, I'm creating an online registration form so you guys can fill it in, tell us what areas you're in, any suggestions for particular locations of doing it, so that I can get people together to possibly do dry runs of what they're going to do before the day. And on May the 25th, we will hopefully get a lot of people in different positions, recording, broadcasting, doing the experiment at the same time. And I'll be broadcasting it on my channel, trying to get as many of the things that are going on at the same time displayed and have a talk with some people and see how close we can get to not only the measurements that Aristophanes got, but the current accepted values of the circumference of the planet. It's a great opportunity to be involved in something like this, and I'm very happy that you suggested that. And in a way, I guess I need to thank Sleeping Warrior for forcing me to contact you.
No, it's great. And anytime we can use simple scientific experiments to really see our world in a new way, then we should do that. I mean, and this is just one of the simplest, and one of them was profound. Yeah,
I absolutely agree. And I don't think we need to carry this on anymore. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I very, very much appreciate you taking your time to speak to me. You can find George Musser on Twitter. You can find a lot of his articles on Scientific America. Please, if you are interested in science, check out Mr. Musser and his work. I've been reading a lot of his articles lately, and they, I think, help explain things very well. If you need any clarifications, please don't go to Sleeping Warrior. But thank you, George Musser, very much for your time. Really do appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
It's a pleasure. I look forward to seeing what you make of all this.
Thank you very much.
Sure thing. Bye now.
Bye now.
Fight the flock, 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 fight the flock,
The Crave.